Welcome back, everybody. So, I'm going to try to do two videos this week. I know I keep saying that, and eventually will happen, but I do have a plan this week because these next two videos are both going to be directly about topics that they always say not to talk about at parties and social events. Um, I think that's partly because we don't like to have conflict. We don't like to talk about things that are difficult because we like our lives to be easy and without challenge oftentimes. But politics and religion, two third rails of life that people like to avoid, those are going to be the main topics of the next two videos. Today, we're going to talk about politics and more specifically, my politics and where I'm coming from. So that way, as we go forward in the channel, whenever I am talking about things, there is a basis of understanding of my worldview, how I see things, where I'm coming from, at least at a base. Um, and my perspective on a lot of these issues. Now, I'm not going to go into deep dives into anything this week. I'm going to be more of a basic overview on my perspective on issues. I am I have no notes for any of these topics, so it's going to be straight off the rip of how I see it because I've had these conversations a number of times. I've looked into a lot of these topics. I have listened to a lot of things about these topics, read a lot of things about these topics, studied these topics, thought about these topics, had a lot of conversations about them. So it is going to be very much my perspectives just as I have it without any coloring or cleaning up of my verbiage. So I would in general be viewed as a conservative. Now, there are people on the left who tend to put people in boxes that would call me MAGA, and I am very far from that. I am not a party line Trump supporter in any way. Yes, some of his policies I support, other of his policies I do not, and I push back on. I am not a follower of Trump. I am a Christian first, most of all. So my politics follow my faith. My politics do not follow my party. Even though I would fall closer in line with one party than the other, my politics 100% follow my faith as best I understand them. And as one of the taglines of this channel, as you can see on whatever it's called when you look at the banner or whatever, firm convictions loosely held, in the sense of I am open to being challenged on these. And if somebody comes to me with something that either proves that my perspective on something or my paradigm on something is wrong, I am willing to change that if they come with enough evidence or I start to see enough things in the world that show that I'm incorrect or I'm seeing something from a different perspective or a wrong perspective. I am willing to change that. And I think that's how we should all approach these. And that's why we need to talk about these things. You need to stand firm in what you believe, but be willing to make changes when the evidence is proven to be counter to your current belief system. So there's a lot of things to run through. I have a list that's definitely not including every possible topic. It's just some things that I thought of, and they're going to be in alphabetical order. It's not in order of importance. I didn't want to make it in order of importance because even that in itself can cloud how people are going to hear me. It's just in alphabetical order. But before I do, I I will say, in general, there are very few people that are in lockstep with their political party that they vote for. People like to put people in boxes, say, oh, you voted for Kamala, that means you believe XYZ, and you can only believe XYZ, and you clearly believe XYZ, and that says this about you. Or you voted for Trump, you must think XYZ, you must believe XYZ, you must be XYZ. And that's not true for almost everybody. And statistically speaking, that is definitely not true for the right in the current political landscape. I'm going to throw up a photo of a study, and I'm going to link that study as well in the show notes or whatever they're called. I need to figure these types of things out, exactly what things are called on YouTube. But that shows this, and it's really interesting that in especially in recent years, the left has had a very narrow set of ideas for what is defined as being on the left, and the right's been a lot wider. It's interesting. So I just bring that up to say when I say I'm on the right, that does not mean that I'm going to fall in lockstep with anything you think about the right typically. Um, I don't have the same views as, the 75-year-old Bush Republican, um, or, the Cheney Republicans, the Warhawks. I am not going to have the same views as the, 22-year-old hardcore MAGA. I'm not going to have the same views as the, typical Trump supporter, or the even the typical Trump opponent in the Republican Party, because I disagree with him on a lot, but I wouldn't say I'm an opponent of his, because I don't think that's beneficial for anyone to be just 100% against anything that somebody does just because of who they are or what you think about them. So one of the reasons I phrase that I'm going in alphabetical order is because, of course, when you go in alphabetical order about political topics, A is first, and abortion starts with an A. So that's going to be the first one we talk about. And I know it's always hard because there's the line of thought is often man shouldn't have opinion on abortion. And I can see the heart behind that thought and that argument, but the reality is we all should have opinions on every portion of political topics, every portion of religious topics, because they matter and we need to be informed. Now, where I stand in this is I am pro life, but I think that's become such a narrow field in how people see it. I think that we need to change who we have making the laws in this country around healthcare in general, but especially around this topic. I defer to my wife on this topic 10 times out of 10. She is a midwife. She knows a lot more about pregnancy and birth than I ever will. But I also I want people to, at every chance possible, choose life. And I know there are times where health of the mother is at risk, and there needs to be resources for that and for protection of mothers in those situations. And also, if we are going to claim to be pro life, we need to be pro life past just getting a baby born. That needs to involve welfare programs that help women with early childhood care, with helping them when they need to be at home with the child, that they have an income coming in to support that they have the diapers and the food that they need, that when the child gets old enough to be in childcare, that there are resources there to help with that. And obviously that can't extend forever, but we need to have ways of helping people through these seasons when they truly need it. And we need to hold fathers accountable. If we are going to force, and I know it's a weird word to use, and but it's the word that culture uses. If we are going to force women to have the babies, we need to force the men to stay involved. And that's just the reality. And there needs to be consequences for somebody who's going to be a deadbeat. And I know there's different situations. That's why I'm saying this needs all these would need to be more detailed videos, because there's situations of assault, there's situations of incest, there is situations where somebody is underage, or there's complications that some people might view as since severe risk to the mother and others might not. So that's why it's a whole detailed conversation that's needed, but that is just the baseline of where I stand on that. Next one I'm going to talk about is charity, and I think charity and welfare need to be different things. When the government tries to step in and be the charity, we run into problems. We run into fraud. We run into waste. It doesn't work. And that's just to put it simply. I'm going to go into this more when I get into the welfare line, but I just wanted to kind of have that said, that government should not be involved in charity. Charity should be coming from individuals, from religious institutions, from nonprofits. And if you want to have some level of regulation in there, we can have a conversation about that. But charity has always been more beneficial and run better when it's done by individuals and organizations and not by the government. Economics, again, this could be a whole series, but socialism doesn't work. Communism doesn't work. We have seen this 1,000 times, tried a lot of different times throughout history, and we have basic examples, and these are simple. And again, we need a lot more depth here, but East-West Berlin, North and South Korea, these are basic examples of one of these systems works and one of these systems doesn't. People try to flee one of these systems and people try to go towards one of these other systems. Capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any system in the history of the world. That's just reality. Now, when you want to get into, there's obviously more details there. There is more of a free market capitalism. There is more government intervention in terms of regulations and breaking up monopolies. And that's where you can get into different conversations here and more details. And I think that no system is black and white. There's no answer is black and white. But the reality is capitalism works. Now, do we need to change things? Are there problems in this country? Does, my generation, I'd say anybody under the age of 40, have it worse than the generation before us? Without a doubt. Is it harder? Without a doubt. Do I think a lot of that difficulty has come from mistakes made by our government with policies? A good chunk of it, absolutely. There's definitely been failures in government. 2008, for example, was a failure of government. 2020 was another example of failure of government in their economic decisions that have led to things becoming more expensive without wages going up, led to a greater disparity between the rich and the poor. But just saying, well, why don't we tax the rich is idiocracy. It makes no actual sense. It's just a nice, fun talking point that makes people feel good. First of all, we tax our wealthy at a higher rate than most places around the world. Our wealthy pay the vast, vast, vast majority of our taxes. And is there loopholes that need to be fixed? Absolutely. Does our tax system need to be simplified? Absolutely. Should we be taxing unrealized gains? No, that's ridiculous. Should we have a one-time tax for billionaire tax? No, that's ridiculous. And people who propose that are just making a talking point because it would never work. You would crash the economy overnight if you did that. Because what most of these people either don't want to admit or are not informed enough to say, all these billionaires don't have that money sitting around in cash. It's in stocks and it's in assets. If you were to ask them to pay even 5% of their wealth in a tax within the next 6 months, they would have to liquidate massive amounts of stock holdings and they would crash the economy overnight. And guess who that would affect? It would affect your 401k, your pensions, your parents' pensions and 401ks, and your grandparents, the things that they're needing to survive right now in their retirement or as they approach retirement would go away overnight. It would cause massive disruptions to the system. And guess what? You would maybe be able to fund some of our welfare programs for maybe a year if you're lucky. By the way, heavy breathing. He's the puppy. So we can go into economics in depth, but the systems that get proposed by the DSA and by a lot of people on the left just are not practical. They sound nice. They are good on a poster. They're good in a 2-minute conversation because, oh, don't you have compassion? Don't you want to help people? And it's like, yes, I want to help people, but I think the way you're trying to do it has proven time and time again that you're going to leave millions of people struggling. And I'm being nice when I say struggling because you look at something like Maoist China when they tried to go towards the government-run economics route and millions of people starved. So centralized planning, it just doesn't work. And we know that. Now, economics, housing prices. Housing prices are out of control. Does putting rent freezes work? No. It doesn't. You're going to have worse living conditions for people. There are going to be less options, and you're going to make it harder for people to find places to live because you're going to squeeze out those people that actually are renting. What is going to lower housing prices? Ease up the regulation. We need to build more. We have a housing shortage in this country. Yes, also stop companies from buying homes. And I know the government's trying to do that, and they've already passed some things that do, and nobody will give Trump credit for that, but that is something the Trump administration has done. They've made it so BlackRock can't continue to purchase homes. They're working on furthering those types of things, and I think they need to go harder and push harder. Now, granted, we have a Senate that accomplishes nothing, which is a whole other conversation, a whole other issue, that the Republican-controlled Senate is terrible. They just don't do their job. They have not passed the SAVE Act. We're going to go into a voter ID later, but it's absurd to have the majority and not be able to accomplish anything. So, that's economics. Again, could continue to go on that for another several hours, but just want to give overviews here. Education. I personally was fine with during the election when they were talking about getting rid of the Department of Education, because we have a broken education system in this country. We have a system that has been declining in its literacy rates. It has been forcing kids through. We have actual reports of teachers coming forward and saying, hey, I've been told to just push kids through the system. And their federal test scores are going down, the state test scores are going down, but these schools are getting more money if they pass students, so they're pushing kids through. We have administrative bloat in schools, where you have administrators that are making a lot of money, and there's just more and more and more of them, and there's just more and more red tape, and you have more and more people working that are not actually teaching in the classroom, that is inflating the budget of these schools and these programs, while making the education worse, while borderline indoctrinating our youth in a lot of these situations with a lot of the ways they're teaching. It's amazing to look at and it's even worse now, but even when I was in school, you look at some of the things that we were taught, and then you look at what actually happened with things in history or economics, and it's not a one-to-one. Never mind the fact that, kids in schools are not often taught practical skills. Who here was taught how to do their taxes or balance a checkbook in school, which seems like a pretty good life skill. We have a very outdated education model right now, and we just keep pouring money into it, thinking money is the answer, and more government regulation is the answer, and more government control is the answer, and more administrators is the answer. And that never works. More administrators is never the answer. I support school choice. I do think there needs to be conversations had about tenure with teachers. I think there's some good things about it. There's some problematic things about it. But again, we're just touching on all these issues, and we could go deeper into the education topic. But that's where I stand on education. I think school choice is needed. I think there's a lot of issues with our public education system, and I am not a fan of the way we do education in this country. And I think it's problematic that the vast majority of educators in this country are left wing, and a lot of that comes from the fact that the schools that educate our educators are loaded with left wing professors and push that agenda pretty hard at the collegiate level. And there's also programs that teachers are encouraged to take in many of these states to get continuing, whether it's continuing education credits or it's programs that the administrators encourage as in almost basically force these teachers to take, that push left-wing agendas into the classroom. Healthcare, again, is one that I would often defer to my wife as somebody who knows even more about this than I do and has a better understanding of it. But I think we can all agree healthcare in America is broken. Healthcare in America is too expensive. Insurance companies there's a problem there. Big pharma is a big problem. Now, I think a lot of these issues, granted, we've always had issues in this country, and a lot of our price issues, they date back to Obamacare. There's a lot of issues with the cost of our health insurance that attaches itself to a lot of the things going on around Obamacare. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying full stop Obamacare was bad. There were things about it that are good. There was necessary changes needed to be made to our healthcare system, especially for lower income people in this country that needed better access to healthcare, without a doubt. But we have a system that prioritizes putting people on medication. Excuse me. It inflates costs like crazy. Yet at the same time, we have extremely overworked and underpaid nurses. We have oftentimes even overworked and underpaid doctors. It costs way too much money to get a degree in that in this country. I think we need to be helping people have lower student debt if they're going into those fields. We need to get rid of pharma's ability to advertise. We're one of only 2 countries that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise drugs on television. I think Trump and the Trump RX thing, which I don't like that he named it Trump RX, but whatever, it is what it is a good start in terms of getting us favored nation drug pricing, lowering the cost of our drugs. But at the same time, doctors need to stop jumping to medication. There are other routes that we can start with first in terms of getting people healthier that needs to be discussed more in this country. Medication is amazing. It is a great scientific discovery in many cases. There are so many things that can help people that are needed, but we are literally jumping to that pill way too quickly. And it is because that is where the money is. That is where pharma is pushing. That is where a lot of the resources are in healthcare that are getting pushed. And those are the things that are raising prices instead of actually helping people be healthier. Healthcare in this country also goes directly related to the food that we eat. Our food is terrible. Our bread is terrible. Our milk is not great. Our food is processed. We eat a lot of junk. Go to places like Europe and you'll feel different. Go to Europe and eat for a week and you'll feel better. You can eat more. You can eat pasta. You can eat bread every morning. You can have coffee every morning. You're going to feel better because the food is just better. You're healthier. It is a massive problem. And to go along with healthcare, we have certain things in this country where people like to create forever patients. And they do that to continue to get money out of people by encouraging them to take certain steps that they should not take. That creates a dependency and a need for them to continue to go to the doctor, continue to get certain medication, and you create massive issues. There are things like hormone replacement therapies and things like that I think we do need to push more for older people, that I think can help them stay off of certain medications and actually be cheaper long-term for our healthcare. But everybody just says healthcare for all, and that's a great talking point. But the problems go so much deeper than that. And if you actually want healthcare for all in a sustainable way, we need to actually make people healthier. We need to actually fix the reasons why healthcare is so expensive. Healthcare is not just so expensive because the government refuses to pay for it. We put a ton of money into our healthcare system in this country. A ton. Way more than anybody realizes. Government-funded healthcare in this country, we actually spend a lot of money. Immigration does link back to the cost of healthcare, whether you like it or not. When you have droves and droves of illegal immigrants, this affects housing prices. This affects healthcare prices.
Yep.
This affects safety in certain communities. I know there's those studies that everybody points to, and it's the same 2 studies out of Texas that there isn't higher levels of crime from illegal immigration. The reality is we don't actually have a real way to track that data. There are 2 studies out of Texas that are incredibly flawed. If you want to do your own go do your own digging on that. If you don't agree with me, you don't agree with me, that's okay. But there are 2 incredibly flawed studies that get repeated and repeated and repeated to make people think, if you look it up, oh, there's 1,000 articles. They're all referring to the same few studies that are flawed. But people don't want to talk about that. There's a lot of concerns about safety, but it's not just safety. Everybody likes to jump to that one. And yes, there are terrible examples. Like there are examples like the Laken Riley examples. There are things like that that should never happen. But that should not be our only focus when we talk about immigration. The issues around immigration that we need to talk about are issues that with cost of living, issues with employment and housing rates, issues with our cost of the welfare that we're pouring in when we already don't have enough money based on how our system's structured to take care of people that we need to take care of. And a lot of that is because of fraud and because of money going to where it shouldn't. It's not that we don't have the money, it's that the money's getting poorly allocated. Now we do need to have paths to citizenship for people. I do think that if people have been here a certain amount of time and we can prove that they've been working and you can bring forth character witnesses, I think there needs to be easy paths forward for people who have character witnesses and employment proof that people can come and they can become citizens. Now, I do think that there needs to be some level of a financial hit for people that do that. If you've been in this country, it's similar to, most of us have student loan debt. So you have something like a citizen debt or something. These people are going to, once they become citizens, a lot of them, at least early on, are going to be receiving welfare anyway. So there needs to be something that they are now contributing back in return for citizenship. And I know that's going to be hard for a lot of people, but we have so many people struggling in this country. We cannot just continue to give and give and give away from the government. I do think churches need to step up with this. I do think other local and religious organizations need to step up to help these people. But if you're here illegally, you need to be sent home. And again, as I said, I think there do need to be some exemptions to that, and I think it needs to be clear, and it needs to be well communicated, and we need people to coordinate. We should not have sanctuary cities. We should not have situations where local governments are protecting illegals against federal agents. Yes, ICE has made mistakes. ICE has made plenty of mistakes. And I'm not going to defend exactly how ICE is doing this, but the reality is when you have the number of illegal immigrants we have in this country, and you have local municipalities and local governments and state governments directly making it harder for them to do their job and not cooperating and telling their local law enforcement not to cooperate, you are leading and opening up the door for more mistakes to be made, for a more difficult working environment for agents. The media is pushing ICE evil, ICE evil, ICE evil, so creating a hostile work environment for these people. And I'm not saying they're all good. There are bad eggs in every bunch. There are bad apples in every bunch, however you want to word it. But you're creating an environment makes it so much harder for these people to operate that you increase the likelihood of mistakes. So for my approach, we need a coordinated effort to, one, get rid of sanctuary cities, and two, make local and state law enforcement and government actually cooperate with ICE. And then on the other hand, we need to establish actual clear paths for people to become citizens if they have stayed here, if they've proven it, if they have character witnesses. There needs to be a clear-cut system for the people that are already here, while at the same time leaving the border as it is right now. It has to stay locked. Now, asylum's the other side of this conversation. Historically, when people are asking for asylum, it is supposed to be about going to the nearest safe country. We have people who seek asylum that then go on vacation back in the country that they're claiming asylum from. That happens. That actually happens. It's not all of them. It's not a lot of them. But the fact that that happens at all says that we have an issue with the asylum structure in this country and in many Western countries. If people genuinely need asylum, they should be going to the nearest safe country. And that doesn't mean that we can't use some of our foreign aid to assist with that, assist with supporting that, and assist with helping that. But we need to be careful what we actually give asylum for. Now, there are countries within our hemisphere that are very close to us that I think we need to increase our asylum programs for. I know there's been a lot of talk around Haiti recently, and I think honestly we should not be cutting our asylum from Haiti. We should be increasing it. That is a country that is very close to us. It's a country that we can actually truly help. But the problem is we have so many illegals and we have so many people taking asylum from places that should not be seeking asylum in this country that we do not have the resources or the room or the ability to continue to take asylum from everywhere. And people in Haiti are now that need asylum are now suffering from that. So that's why this is a nuanced conversation like they all are. But we are hurting people by allowing that free reign of legal immigration that we did for the 4 years under Biden and Kamala. And the fighting that we're doing to make it so hard to deport people that should be deported. Now, yes, I'm all for due process. People need their due process. But it gets really hard when you have this many people to do due process the way that people want to do it. We need to there needs to be a better system in place. I know it's easy to say, oh, you need a better system, but that's the reality. We need to create a better path to, one, sending people back home, and then two, for those people who actually do deserve a chance at citizenship, to be gaining citizenship. If somebody breaks into your home illegally, you don't lock them up in a bedroom until they get due process and then get them out. You get them out and then they get their due process. And I'm not saying that's exactly how it should work with countries, but the thought process holds similarly, where we need to actually get these people out and then get them their due process. And if they need to come back in, they can come back in. And I know that can be hard. And I'm not saying these things are easy, but life is hard. Not everything is easy. Another big time third rail, the LGBT issue, the Pride Month, the however you want to word this, it's controversial, clearly. And as a Christian, I think most people can assume where I stand on this. But I am not a Bible thumper in the sense of I'm not going to go to every homosexual couple and bang them over the head with the scriptures. I am called to judge believers, not non-believers. Now, if I see a Christian couple that I have a relationship with, that I am friendly, I will let them know that scripture tells me that what they're engaging in is a sin. But I have no place to go into a secular person's life and tell them what they're doing is a sin. When it comes to somebody who's not a believer, my only job is to teach them the gospel. Now, don't put that in my kids' schools. Don't put that in front of my children. I don't want that in my children's media. I don't want it to be pushed. The fact that they have a month and veterans have a day. These are all things I have issue with. Why does every professional sports team need to have a Pride night, but we're getting rid of most of the heritage nights? I had a good long conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about just get rid of all of them. Get rid of all of the special nights. If one of them's going to be an issue or any of them are going to be an issue, just do none of them. If you're going to do any, do a 4th of July night, like a Independence Day night or something. But stop trying to force this upon us in our culture everywhere we turn, that you see it. And I know it's because for so long they were, oppressed and condemned and looked down upon, and now they're trying to get away from that. But the way they're oftentimes, so many people in that community are going about it, and so many supporters of that community are going about it, it is problematic. If we were to go at this from a Christian angle, this would be a very different conversation. I'm going at this from a purely political angle. I politically have no issues with gay marriage being legal, but you can't force somebody to do it in a church, to marry somebody in a church. You can't force a private business to, I know this was a case years and years ago, but you can't force somebody to bake a cake or to do anything. It's a private business. You cannot force anybody who owns their own business to do anything. You cannot force a church to support gay marriage. I think when it comes to the trans issue, I am never going to tell an adult what they can and can't do with themselves. I think that there still needs to be a lot of studying done into this topic. I think we don't know the long-term effects of hormone replacement yet. Truly, in terms of a grand scale, we have not had a large enough group of people do this for long enough to truly know the effects. We do see some early studies and effects that seem to be that it's dangerous on people's health. Now, when it comes to children, no, you do not transition children. You do not even begin to transition children. You do not do that. Stay away from our kids. If somebody, when they hit, I say 25, but if people want to argue 18, 18, and they still want to do that and take that path and go down that route, okay. But that should not be route number one. Even if I'm not going to say from like ignoring whether I see it as moral or not see it as moral, from a purely healthcare standpoint, the effects of it, the studies seem to show, are not beneficial on somebody's physical well-being. And I think protecting someone's physical well-being is important. And with children are not old enough to make that decision. We don't allow kids to get tattoos, which can be removed, let alone get a gender reassignment surgery. So I think it's a very, very dangerous thing, and I don't think it's something that should be happening with kids. The whole conversation around LGBT and pride and all of that, again, we could talk for that for hours. We could have a whole series on that. But that is just my overview of that. And again, to say, I am never going to tell a adult non-believer how to stand on that issue. It is not my place. And even with a believer, if I don't have a personal relationship with them, it is not my place until I develop a friendship with them. I'm not just going to run and condemn people just because. Trump, not necessarily a political issue, but a political issue. He is our current president. He is loud. He is boisterous. He says a lot of things in the wrong way. He has done a lot of bad things. But he also was the better of two bad options. Many of his policies, as you support, he's much better on the border. I, to an extent, supported the tariffs. I think they went a little too far, and I don't exactly love how he ended up using them and his dialogue around them. But I think in some levels they were needed. I think a lot of his work in foreign policy in our side of the globe, and especially since a lot of things happening in Central and South America, I think he's done well. I think he negotiated the situation with Greenland fairly well. I think Iran has been a mess. I was okay with the first strikes to get rid of the original nuclear site, and when there was uprising, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt at first on the most recent war in Iran. I think that whether he was given bad intelligence or he just made a bad decision out of a ego and desperation, I think this has turned into be a mistake. You are dealing with people that are not rational. In that regime, you are dealing with a group that is looking for the 12th Imam, which is a different conversation. And if you guys don't know what that is, it's basically there's a radical group of Islamists who are basically actually seeking the end of the world through the 12th Imam to come and usher in the end times. And many of the leaders in Iran are part of that sect of Islam, and they're actually pushing for that. And so you're dealing with people who are not logical. So when I saw that there was uprisings and you saw maybe there was a chance to overthrow the current regime, I said, all right, maybe he has some information and intel that the average person doesn't. Whether that intel was wrong or just didn't pan out, it seems now that the people weren't ready for an uprising. There was not enough support within the military to turn on the regime. Killing the Ayatollah, he was not a good person, but you did not have a plan to properly step in when there was that opening, and that is a failure. And now we're having massive issues in the Strait of Hormuz. You're having issues with oil. Now, Granted, the whole oil thing is a different conversation. I'm going to briefly side tangent into that with there's some really weird things about why oil did not go as high as everybody was projecting it to go. And there's some definitely major concerns over the fact that maybe China's economy is doing terribly right now, which is why oil didn't shoot up, because their demand for oil is not what we thought it was. Um, and China's secretly hiding a very, very struggling economy. And I think around the world, there's a chance that the entire world economy is really struggling and we might be due for something pretty soon. Um, but I do know there's concerns. We need to get the strait flowing because we need oil flowing because our reserves are going to run out. We don't have the ability to refine our own oil, which is sounds ludicrous, but our refineries are not built to refine our own oil, and we've not been able to build our own refineries because of political pressure and the fact that it takes so long to make a refinery that by the time it was actually started and in the process, a new president would be in place and a new political power would be in place where somebody else would be controlling the House and the Senate, and it would get squashed and we wouldn't have that refinery built. So we literally can't refine our own oil because of political drama, which is nonsense and a whole other issue. Trump also needs to learn to get off of Twitter. He needs to learn to stop using such inflammatory rhetoric. He needs to learn to apologize. I don't like Trump. I don't like so much about Trump. But I support some of the policies of his administration, and I'm against some of the policies of administration. The reason why I had Trump on here is because I have lost friends who are on the left simply because they think that because I'm on the right or right of center, that I'm a full-on Trumper and everything Trump says is gospel. And it's just not true. And the whole idea of the I didn't leave the left left me it's true. And yet when you talk to so many people who today are still on the left, they will say that the why am I blanking on it? The window, the window in politics, the Overton window has actually shifted right, and that's just not true, because our entire politics have shifted left. And I know for some of the lefties, we're not nearly as far left as they want to go, so they're going to say we're not left at all. But the Republican Party today is basically the Democratic Party of the 90s. If you look at policies point for point, outside of maybe some things around taxes, it is basically the Democratic Party platform from the 90s, if not even more progressive in some ways. And a lot of people don't want to admit that, but the left is the party that across the board has gotten more extreme on a lot of things. That's not to say the right has not gotten a little crazy on some things as well. And I think some of that is around some of the issues that I do have with Trump, where he has gotten a little crazy on some things. Voter ID, the SAVE Act, the biggest failure of the Republican-controlled Senate, not passing the SAVE Act. Voter ID is one of the most supported things in this country across race and political ideology. Almost everybody wants voter ID. And the politics that were pushed around the SAVE Act were ridiculous. People trying to say that this was a way to suppress women from voting, or this was a way to try to suppress minorities from voting or create fear tactics. It's just not true. Us trying to create a system that requires people to prove they're citizens to register to vote and then provide a valid photo ID at the ballot box, it's pretty straightforward. There was provisions put into it that said states could create systems to make it easier for people to access the documentation that they needed to prove citizenship. They explicitly said states could set up things to make it easier for people to get birth certificates, to get marriage license, proof of marriage, your marriage certificate, your license. We're not blanking exactly what it's called. Your marriage certificate, to prove name changes and things like that. They created systems, set up systems in place to make it easy for people who are citizens to prove they're citizens, and they still will not vote this through because the Republicans are too weak to stand up to the fact that they don't have a supermajority of 60 votes and they can't get this through. They can't. They're too afraid of the filibuster, and they won't refuse to even force a talking filibuster. It is just a complete failure of the Republicans, and voter ID can be a whole topic in itself, but it's something that we need in this country, and we need to have more secure elections. Even if there's not actual voter fraud, there's too many problems and holes in our election that just create doubt. And that is even bigger of an issue in some ways than the actual fraud. Because when people don't trust the elections, that is almost as bad as the actual being fraud. You look at what happened in California. You look at a situation with the mayoral race in LA, where Spencer Pratt was in second place after the election day. Then as mail-in ballots started to get counted and come in weeks after the election, which, first of all, every advanced country in the world actually within a couple of days has their election results counted. Why does California take weeks to a month? Insane. But when you have a situation where mail-in ballots all of a sudden start to come in, and not only do they vote for a tax increase for everyday Californians, which I don't know anybody who would vote for that, but the third place candidate gets more mail-in ballot votes than both Pratt and then Karen Bass, who was the first place, the leading candidate on the left, by a disproportionate rate. And I'm not saying that there is fraud. I'm just saying that raises so much questions when things get counted for weeks and weeks, and that raises doubt, especially when you find out things about ballot harvesting and them pushing certain candidates on the mail-in because they know that certain candidates are going to need it. There's too many holes in the system that can get exploited that need to get fixed that just create doubt. We're going to go to two W's, war and welfare. War, I talked a little about the Iran war. War, I think there are times when it's necessary. I think it needs to be avoided at almost all costs. It needs to be limited. I do think that we spend a whole lot of money on defense, and the reason why we spend so much money on defense is, one, because we have to. We have established ourselves in a situation that if we don't, it'll be detrimental to our economy and our standing in the world. But we also are the police of just about all of our allies. We are the backup for everybody. We are the reason, hiccups. We're the reason why Europe can have such a robust welfare system, because they don't have to put as much money into their military, because we do so much of their military needs for them. And those are the types of things that need to be changed. We actually need to negotiate better with our allies to have our allies actually pick up their fair portion of the load in terms of military might around the world. And now, when I said it's the only reason, that's the reason why they can have their welfare state. Obviously, that's a super oversimplification. There's a lot of different things around Europe and their welfare state and reasons why it's really broken in a lot of ways. There are so many different problems over there that we can go into at a different time in a different video. But why they can even think about having their welfare state is because of a lot of it's because of what we do with our military in terms of subsidizing them. But there are definitely issues with that. Now, last one is welfare before I shut this down. And then the next time I have you guys on, I'm going to talk about my Christian faith and why I believe what I believe and what I believe and what true Christianity actually means biblically. But welfare. I understand why people have a soft spot for this. People have compassion. People want to help people. People think, well, if Elon Musk is a trillionaire, there should be nobody who ever goes without a meal. Okay, I see that where you're coming from, and I understand why you have so much passion there and you want to help people, and that's beautiful that you want to help people. But welfare needs to be limited, and it needs to be restricted in terms of how long you can be on it. First of all, food stamps. We need to control what you can actually purchase and what you can't purchase with food stamps. I'm sorry, but you should not be getting soda on food stamps. You should not be getting chips on food stamps. Food stamps should be for the necessities of what you actually need to feed yourself. And if you want something else, you need to go out and work on ways. And I know it's not possible for everybody. You need to work on ways of trying to increase your personal income, increase your marketability in the market, to better yourself. Now, we need welfare for people who need welfare. We talked about with the abortion issue about actually needing to help mothers. We need welfare there to help single moms or single dads who have a child and they do not have the time to work because they need to take care of their child. We need welfare for them. We need welfare for people who have legitimate disabilities who cannot work. We need welfare for people who are down on their luck and have run into a few different bad situations and they need a chance to get back on their feet and they need a little boost for a season, 6 months, a year and a half until they can get back on their feet. Those are things we need welfare for. Welfare is not a charity. It is not there to create dependence of the state for their entire lives. And I know that's not everybody on welfare, but the fact is it is a number of people on welfare, and that needs to be dealt with. Welfare, again, is a whole other topic, but I think we need more charity in this country and less welfare. We need less government spending. We have a massive welfare state in this country. People don't realize our welfare is larger than our military budget. It's larger than the debt. It's the largest portion of our spending as a country every year. Social Security, it's welfare. Social Security is a mess. Social Security never should have been done the way it's done, and that's a whole different topic. So if people didn't pay into Social Security and just took that money and put it into the market, we'd all be better off. But we are where we are with Social Security, and that's going to be a major explosion that's going to happen at some point in the near future when that runs out of money. We have Medicaid, we have Medicare, both welfares. We have food stamps. There's tons of welfare programs in this country. It is the largest portion of our budget. We spend a lot more money than people think on welfare. And the problem is there is fraud, there is waste, and there is some abuse on the welfare. And I know that's the cliche fraud, waste, and abuse. But the reality is it's true. Welfare is needed, but welfare is bloated. Welfare is used in places it shouldn't. And for people that don't need it and for people that are on it for way too long. So that's where I stand on those topics. That's where I stand on some of the basics of politics. That's where I'm going to be coming from with a lot of the topics that we talk about. If you hear me talk about different things that are going on in the world, that's the basic framework that I'm going into. Doesn't mean my opinions are not going to change in the future, but when something happens in the world and I do a reaction video or I do a full breakdown of something that happens in culture, I am going to basing it off of this worldview in terms of politics. And the next one I do with when I talk about Christianity, you're going to see my Christian worldview, and my Christian worldview impacts my politics. I'm a Christian first. My Christianity will always inform my politics. My politics will never inform my Christianity. And that's really where we're at. And I just wanted you guys to know where I'm coming from when I talk about any topic moving forward. So I'm going to pray for us quickly. And if you guys have any comments or if you want to push back on anything that I said, feel free to throw that in the comments. I would love to interact with you all and just have a good conversation, because that's what we need in this country. We need conversation. We shut down things way too quickly. I've lost friendships, not because I'm convinced, not because of my beliefs, but because people refuse to talk about them. People refuse to actually understand where I'm coming from, why I think the way I do. They just said, oh, you have this belief, that means X about you, and I'm shutting you down. And that's not healthy for anybody. That's not good for anybody. We need to have real conversations about topics in this world. That's how you're going to actually come to solutions. That's how people are actually going to grow. That's how we're actually going to fix a lot of the problems that we have, is actually talking about it. Because the less we talk about it, the more divided we're going to become, the more that the people in power are going to be able to play us against each other, and we're all just going to be worse off for it. So, like, follow, subscribe, share it, all the above, and join me in a quick prayer as we close out. Father God, thank you for this time that we could just sit down and talk about things that affect our everyday lives, and some things that don't affect our everyday lives, but still affect us from time to time or indirectly affect us. And just, Father God, help us to be able to have open dialogues about these topics with friends and with family, without creating vitriol and separation and division, but creating understanding, where we understand where each other come from and we can be more educated. And when we have false beliefs or we're believing things because of a false understanding or false worldview or a broken logic, that we learn to change that and fix it so that way we can better honor you with the way we see the world and the way we love others and the way we treat others and the way we seek to solve problems, Lord. Because the reality is we all want what's best for others, and we all just have different ways of getting there. And we just trust in you, Lord, and we trust that if we have these conversations genuinely and we truly try to talk to people with love and care, that these conversations can go well and can breed relationship growth and just deeper intimacy with friends and family, Father. We thank you, Lord, and in your name we pray. Amen. All right. Have a good night or good day or whatever time it is for you guys, everybody. All right. Bye bye.